Shortly after the attack on October 7, you may have heard the argument that the Palestinian party responsible, Hamas, had been funded by Benjamin Netanyahu to prevent a peace agreement with the Palestinian Authority, and that Hamas itself was a creation of Israel, with clips like these doing the rounds.
What if I told you that Israel helped create Hamas?
If you look at the history, you'll find out that Hamas was encouraged and really started by Israel because they wanted Hamas to counteract Yasser Arafat.
But what if I told you that Hamas was not created by Israel, and that this idea is an exaggerated misinterpretation of history? Yet, if this is the case, then where do such claims come from, and is there any truth to them? In order to answer these questions, we have to go back to 1973, when a Palestinian member of the Muslim Brotherhood named Sheikh Ahmed Yassin started the Mujamma al-Islammiyah, an Islamic social organization that would aim to push a conservative interpretation of Sunni Islam inside of the Gaza Strip. At this time, Israel internally occupied Gaza and sought to suppress Palestinian resistance groups in line with the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, which was actively fighting Israel from its headquarters in Lebanon. So, when the Mujamma, colloquially referred to in Gaza as the Ikhwan or Brotherhood, were seeking to build an Islamic civil society sector, were preaching nonviolence against the occupier, and acting in a hostile manner to Palestinian secular nationalists, socialists, and communists, Israel saw an opportunity. According to the Washington Post at the time, Israeli occupation forces were lenient to Mujamma activists, while former Israeli Brigadier General Yitzhak Segev claimed the Israeli government gave him a budget of hundreds of thousands of dollars to support some of the group's projects, although the majority of their funds came from the Arab Gulf states and the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood. Then in 1979, Israel even recognized the Mujamma as an official organization so that it could operate without being cracked down upon by the occupation forces. Now, this is a collection of evidence used to claim that Harakat al-Muqawamah al-Islammiyah, or the Islamic Resistance Movement, which Hamas is an acronym for, was created by Israel. Yet this conclusion is born of a lack of historical understanding and also gives rise to the idea that the Israelis set up the group, controlled it, and may also have some influence over it today. In reality, while the Mujamma began operating under the auspices of the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood and sought to build a Palestinian branch of the party, pursuing the goals of Islamizing society and providing services, the group ran into major issues and eventually experienced a change in tactics. The Mujamma succeeded at building schools, mosques, libraries, and helped found the Islamic University of Gaza, also building religious institutions and operating medical clinics and orphanages, and providing food and aid to those in need. In doing so, it gained a base of supporters. However, another organization also began forming in the late 1970s, declaring itself Palestinian Islamic Jihad, PIJ, in 1981, started by Dr. Fathi Shaqaqi, who was influenced by the Muslim Brotherhood too, but also drew inspiration from the Islamic revolutionaries in Iran that overthrew the Shah and preached armed resistance. Prior to the Israeli invasion of Lebanon in 1982, mass protests also broke out in Gaza and the West Bank, as the occupying forces began to become more extreme in their methods of violence in the occupied territories. Following the defeat of the PLO in 1982 in Lebanon, after Israel killed around 20,000 Palestinians and Lebanese, later overseeing massacres of civilians in refugee camps like Sabra and Shatila, at a time when the PLO fighters had fled to North Africa, many PLO-aligned members switched to support PIJ. While the Mujamma argued its belief that uniting the Muslims and creating a perfect Islamic society was an essential precursor to overthrowing the occupiers, Palestinian Islamic Jihad was preaching armed resistance, sometimes causing street clashes between the two Islamic groups. In the mid-1980s, under the supervision of Sheikh Ahmed Yassin, the Mujamma began to set up a security apparatus called al-Majid, leading to the arrest of Yassin and scores of others involved who were smuggling weapons into the Gaza Strip at the time. In 1987, a mass uprising in the West Bank and Gaza Strip began, called the Intifada. While the Intifada was overwhelmingly non-violent at the beginning, an armed clash between PIJ's fighters and Israeli occupation forces in Gaza's Shuja'iyya neighborhood had broken out right before the uprising, which began building Fathi Shaqaqi's Islamic resistance group a larger following. Later that year, the Mujamma was no more, and Hamas was born, as Sheikh Ahmed Yassin and others had come to the understanding that it was time to launch the armed struggle. The Hamas creation story has to be placed in the context of a group emerging at a time of great despair, similar to how Palestinian Marxist groups would rise following the downfall of Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser's socialist Arab nationalism. After Egypt's defeat due to Israel's surprise attack in June of 1967, the ideology of the Egyptian leader began to lose credibility across the region. One of the results of this was that George Habash, who had previously led the Arab nationalist movement, would go on to form the Marxist group called the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, for instance. Similarly, an ideological sea change was occurring inside of Palestine following the defeat of 1982, and a social group that emerged as a Palestinian offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood would seize the opportunity to become the most popular group leading a new wave of Islamic resistance movements in Palestine, at a time of increasing Israeli brutality. Now, the implication of pointing out Israeli opportunism in the 1970s and early 80s to formulate an argument that suggests Israel created Hamas delegitimizes the group's role in the national liberation struggle and robs Palestinians of their autonomy under such a narrative. While many Palestinians, especially in Gaza, have historically been opposed to Hamas as a political force, they overwhelmingly support the armed wing of the group and its role in fighting their occupiers. Despite the fact that the Israelis, who were attempting to build localized Palestinian administrative bodies to ease the administrative burden of the occupying authorities and undermine the PLO, had actively encouraged groups like the Mujamma to help achieve this goal, it is very clear that as soon as weapons became involved, their attitudes changed. This had more to do with the fact that Israel did not anticipate the kind of impact that their war in Lebanon would have, or that Islamic resistance groups like Lebanese Hezbollah and Hamas would emerge to fill the gap left by a defeated PLO and leftist groups. Exemplifying this, here's Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu in 1982.
If you take away the Soviet Union and its chief proxy, the PLO, international terrorism would collapse.
Simply switch the words Soviet Union for Iran and PLO for Hamas, and you'll find that the Israeli argument against Palestinian resistance has not changed at all. Saying this, if the argument was that because of Israel, Hamas exists, then this would be accurate. But it would also be accurate for every single group resisting Israel. But what about the Oslo Accords, the suicide bombings, Palestinian civil war, and Israel's influence on all of that? Or what about the Qatari aid money being transferred into Gaza in suitcases? Well, stay tuned for part 2 and 3 as we look deeper into the history of whether Israel really helped to create and prop up Hamas.